From this moment on, the session is being recorded. Welcome everybody. This is the session of the series of talks that we are making here at NERI, that's the Center for Economics and International Relations in the University of Salvador in Brazil. And today we have a very special guest, Professor Sunstein from Harvard University. Professor Sunstein is well known worldwide because he has written some very important books like Nudge, Improving Decisions About Health, Wealth, and Happiness, together with the economist Richard Thaler of the University of Chicago. And among other books, a very good book that I really like is How Change Happens. For this book on, I have paid more attention to behavioral economics and the impacts of designing specific nudges, devices, or incentives to make people behave in some specific way. So how we can improve public policies to achieve better results. So Cass Sunstein is an American legal scholar, particularly in the fields of constitutional law, administrative law, environmental law, and law and behavioral economics, and the New York Times best-selling author of The World According to Star Wars and Nudge in 2008. He was also the administrator of the White House Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs in the Obama administration from 2009 to 2012. So, Professor, thank you for having accepted this invitation to join us today. It's an honor for us. We want to learn from you, to hear from you, your opinions about how the world is doing today and what we can do to tackle these difficult and tough times we are facing now. Thank you, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. It's a pleasure and also an honor to be able to speak to you. I had an opportunity to speak to a number of people from Brazil who visited Cambridge a few months ago, and it was a fantastic discussion of health and safety, and this was well before the current pandemic, but I at least learned a great deal from those discussions. I'm also acutely aware that Brazil is facing very serious challenges. The United States is also. We share this, let's call it problem, but also opportunity. So to see a public health challenge of this magnitude as a very unusual chance to do something very good is probably the right state of mind to have. I'm reminded also, as I think about the United States and Brazil as of today, of a phrase that President Obama would often use in the White House. When things were very difficult, people would be concerned and they'd see the magnitude of the problem, whether it involves safety or health or climate change or poverty. And what President Obama would say is, better is good. Mm-hmm. It's a very instructive little phrase. Better is good, meaning not to be daunted by the fact that people are dying and people are getting sick. If you can save one life or 20 lives, that's good. You can't change the world usually, but you can change someone's world often. And so let's talk a little bit about how to do that. The name of these remarks, and they're going to be relatively brief, I've given them a title. The word is sustainability, and I mean sustainability in the large. I don't mean it to refer only to the environment or climate change or organic food. I mean sustainability as a large concept. And I have three chapters, if you would, of my little book called Sustainability, which I've written for you. Chapter 1 is called Nudge, Chapter 2 is called Sludge, and Chapter 3 is called Well-Being. Those are the chapters. Okay, all over the world, nations are using nudges to try to protect public health. The idea might be to have a sign that says very clearly, wear a mask. Or it might be that when you go to a store that's open, it says stay 6 feet away from each other with a little graphic design showing what 2 meters or 6 feet looks like. Or it might be something that says wash your hands often, and people might be reminded of that fact in a timely fashion. Or it might be simplification of a communication that is for many people just too complicated to understand in its present form. Okay, we can think of all of these things as nudges. They aren't the only thing countries are doing. We're seeing mandates and prohibitions also, but nudges often make a mandate work, and sometimes they are used instead of a mandate. If we want to think about what nudges are, I think the best simple understanding comes from Europe, where there's a word, east, which is meant to capture nudges. And the word east means easy, attractive, social, and timely. To say it again, easy, attractive, social, and timely. And if we look at nations that have done well with respect to the pandemic, New Zealand is one, Australia is another, Denmark is a third, they have used nudges and the East framework. Most important, they have made things social by saying, as the New Zealand Prime Minister said, we are a team of 5 million. Or they have managed to create a social norm in favor of staying home or wearing masks, saying this is what everyone is doing. Or they have used the word united. We are united as a way of creating a sense of common interest and common practice, so that when individuals don't take care of their health, they feel that they've deviated from the norm. New Zealand and Australia and Denmark have also done very well at making the healthy course of action easy, either through just indicating to people what they should be doing and making it very clear and simple, or by giving people social and economic support so that if they're staying at home or facing economic problems, the challenge is cushioned a little bit by things that the government is doing. Okay, let's keep in mind that the little framework of East has in it an indication that if people see themselves engaged in a common endeavor, and if it doesn't seem extremely painful to do it, we're more likely to get healthy behavior. Here's some data that I think is extremely revealing. It shows if people think that if they wear a mask, they will protect their own health, they are more likely to wear the mask. It's a very good thing to do, to give people a sense that their own health is at risk. But if people think if they don't wear a mask or if they go out, they will endanger others, they will put at risk other people in their family and neighborhood, they're more likely to stay home or wear a mask. There's a large lesson in that, which is that contrary to my friends at the University of Chicago, who emphasize that people are self-interested, people are often most strongly motivated by a sense they don't want to be terrible people. They don't want to endanger others. And that's a way of saying that the S in social indicates that it's not that difficult to trigger people's sense of social responsibility. I want to underline the fact that some nations, Ireland has done very well in many ways also, have been very systematic and disciplined at using the East framework, and everything they've done has been attached to some aspect of the framework in terms of communication. And that hasn't prevented all deaths, but it has prevented some, and better is good. I'm done with my first chapter. Here's my second chapter. It's called Sludge. And if there's any concept I'd love to get across right now, it's sludge. The word sludge refers to administrative burdens, paperwork requirements, reporting requirements, frictions that we all encounter in life. The United States imposes over 11 billion hours in paperwork requirements on the American people. Over 11 billion hours. Those may involve the hours people have to spend to get licenses and permits. It might involve as part of the 11 billion hours, what people have to do to get education, or to get financial help, or to get paperwork requirements done so that they can get certain opportunities. The take-up rate for many programs in my country, I'm embarrassed to say, is around 40 to 50%. And the reason is sludge. COVID-19 presents a wonderful opportunity for countries all over the world, and I almost pray that this will happen in Brazil, which is we will see a war on sludge. That is, the administrative burdens that are preventing people from getting something that it's important for them to get should be just taken away. And in many countries, we are seeing a war on sludge produced by the pandemic, so that in some places people have to get interviews, go through in-person interviews to get benefits. Those interviews are no longer required. In some places, people have to fill out forms to get permits or to get health care. In some places, the forms have been eliminated or simplified. People have been required to report periodically on things. They're no longer required to report. Both private institutions, hospitals, doctors, employers are eliminating sludge, and governments are eliminating sludge too. Now, there are two reasons for this, which I think the second of which is particularly important, I believe, for Brazil. The first is important for every country. Under normal circumstances, an administrative burden or a paperwork requirement might be justified as a way making sure that the person deserves the license or is eligible for the benefit or is willing to do what must be done to get the educational opportunity. But under current circumstances, the harm done by sludge is much higher than it was 3 months ago. And that cost of sludge for real human lives is so high that the benefits in terms of ensuring eligibility and so forth just don't justify those costs. And that helps explain why a very systematic effort to conduct what I'm going to call a sludge audit is important to do today, tomorrow, yesterday, and certainly in the coming month. We had a phrase in government, which is, there is no mañana. There is no tomorrow. With respect to things that can make a difference in people's lives, that can make for better, and better is good, there is no mañana. Forgive my accent, would you? It's not very good. Okay, third and final chapter. It's called Well-Being. And here what I'd like to do is to make an amendment to the European framework for behavioral insights and nudging. So the European framework is EAST, E-A-S-T. My amendment is, let's call it FEAST. And I'm hoping this will particularly resonate in Brazil, because like in my country, a feast is a very good thing.
Yes,
and
here too.
What I'm adding to the EAST framework is the word fun. I'm trying to start the framework with the word fun. So it is fun easy, attractive, social, and timely. What I want to suggest is for behavior change, often the secret ingredient, what works best, is to add some fun to the mix. There are efforts, I'm going to give you a few examples, to encourage people to make healthier choices with respect to food, healthier eating choices. In one study, people were encouraged to eat healthier food, vegetables and so forth, on the ground that it was healthier. And the study found a 14% increase in consumption of vegetables. That's good. But in another version of the study, the same kind of population was not told vegetables are healthier. It was told they are really tasty and delicious. That created a 27% increase in vegetable consumption. To emphasize the taste was more effective than to emphasize the health. The company Pepsi markets various diet drinks, as I'm sure you're aware. In some countries, they marketed Diet Pepsi. It did pretty well, Diet Pepsi. Many people got Diet Pepsi. But they tried also in places to market another diet drink, which tastes very similar, called Pepsi Max. Pepsi Max is not very different from Diet Pepsi, but it did better. And the reason is people think Pepsi Max, that's fun, and it's also healthy. Diet Pepsi, they think diet, healthy, and it also tastes good. Pepsi Max is a framework, I'm going to get to the pandemic in a moment, is a framework for thinking about behavioral change in many domains. Amazon.com markets some products with frustration-free packaging. Frustration-free packaging. And if you buy electric razors, as I do, buy electric razors, it's a great pleasure to get a package that doesn't have plastic and doesn't have wires and doesn't have a lot of cardboard. Just easy. You open up the box and there's the razor. That's great. But I got curious, what is frustration-free packaging actually about? And as you look it up, study it, it's about sustainability. It's about the environment. No plastic, less disposable waste, no solid waste. It's green packaging, but they call it frustration-free packaging. The reason is it's fun. Okay, now to get to the pandemic. A pandemic isn't fun. It just isn't. But it can be frightening and miserable, or it can be hopeful and committed. In New Zealand, the Prime Minister has been extremely effective at injecting constant sense of good nature, of hope, and even some fun. In announcing the lockdown, she said, you know what? We're going to give an exemption to the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy. They are not limited or restricted by our lockdown. That was extremely popular in New Zealand. It brought a smile to people's faces. It's possible that is not only unify people, the S in social, and to give a sense of a norm, but also to give people a sense of, there's no English word for this, there might be a German word, maybe there's a Spanish word, that combines determination and optimism. That's not quite fun, but it's in the same universe. Okay, to combine my 3 chapters, I'm almost done, of sustainability writ large. The first is about nudges and the EAST framework to give people clarity and simplicity and guidance that isn't confusing and that isn't upsetting about what they should do to reduce their risks and to reduce risk to others. Second, to reduce sludge in private and public institutions, including universities. And this may be a long-term incidental benefit of what's happening now, where sludge is being cut not just for the time of the pandemic, but for all time. And to focus on well-being of which the F in feast is the happiest part. That's the sustainability book, which I've just written in the last couple of days, knowing I was going to do this. I don't think it'll ever be published, so you're the only ones who are ever going to hear it. But I want to end with a question for you, which is, what's the most precious commodity human beings have? What's the most precious thing of all that those of us who are blessed to live, even in a very challenging time, what's the most precious thing we have? I suggest the answer is simple. Time. Time. Let's find a way to give people more of it. Thank you.
Professor Sunstein, thank you very much for your opening remarks. It's really interesting to hear from you these first thoughts about 3 different books that you have written, and you are writing a new book right now for us in this speech. I have a question for you. When you say people are preparing their questions here, so in the meantime, I will make my own question. You said, so there are some people here raising their hands. You said that unity is very important to face the pandemics. But we are living in divided societies in the US and in Brazil. And there are different incentives, different public policies that come from the federal government and the state level governments, both in the US and Brazil. President Bolsonaro is very vocal against social isolation as a way to tackle the pandemics here in Brazil. So we are isolated right now. We have our students here in this live session talking to you like through the computer, because we cannot be together face to face in this moment. So we think that it's very important to have this social isolation, because the curve in Brazil is really, we have seen a spike in the curve, and you have so many more cases in the weeks to come. We are very worried about that, and we have a divided nation. So how to tackle the situation, these pandemics, in a moment in which our societies are strongly and deeply divided? How can these small behavioral tactics and incentives can create a bigger environment that are conducive to better policies in a larger scale? Is it possible to bridge the gap between these 2 levels, the micro and the macro levels?
It's a great question. So one possibility is that different areas and different institutions will have different practices because they make different judgments. And whether or not that's good, it might be inevitable. So I'm going to give a different answer in a moment, but many universities in the United States closed down before officials suggested they should. And the reason was their own assessment was the health risks were sufficiently serious that that's what they had to do. And even if President Trump wasn't urging that, he wasn't complaining. He may not have been happy, but if they closed down, they closed down. And so to say that different institutions in different regions will make different decisions, that might be part of life in a divided place. Second possibility is just for people to speak to each other in a way that is very focused on facts and that doesn't make political party or political ideology part of the conversation. So I work for President Obama. I have many good friends who work for President Trump. And I talk to them in a way that is not connected with our different political affiliations, including about this problem. So it might be that President Trump thinks that, I'm talking right now from Massachusetts, that Massachusetts is being too aggressive in its policies. But I believe he understands that's an assessment of the health threats, that whether or not right is not unreasonable. So for people to talk to each other in a way that's based on such facts as we have, that's not accusatory or treating people as if they're bad people, they're just making different judgments. That might be a path forward. I found in Washington, my own experience was that the more we got into details, the less we were in disagreement with each other. And if we were in disagreement with each other still, at least we knew what we were disagreeing about. So for people who are, let's say, very Republican on the environment, they don't agree with people who are very Democratic on the environment. But if you have an air pollutant that is killing people in Los Angeles, Republicans aren't very happy about that. And if you have an environmental initiative that is going to throw a lot of businesses out of work, Democrats aren't very happy about that. So to get into the details, to monitor the facts is extremely helpful. I'd want to see, if I were, working there, what are the trend lines for deaths and what are the trend lines for cases? If they're getting much worse, then there's a reason, at least for the moment, to be more aggressive. If things are starting to look a lot better, then we can loosen the guidance.
This time we have a question here from Professor Moisés Conde, and he says, Professor, it's a great honor for our entire academic community to have you here. My question is related to the American health system. Is it possible that the pandemics could make the United States to implement a free public health system in the near future?
It's also a very good question. Thank you for that. Many people are, if they're poor, they have free health care. So if you are very poor, then you can get benefits from Medicare or Medicaid. So we have some of that for poor people. For people like me, and I'm not poor yet, our economy is struggling, so I may get there. I think professors probably aren't going to get poor, but those of us who are lucky enough not to be poor, I think there isn't a great interest in giving people like me free health care. At least a majority isn't for that. There are some people who are interested in free health care for all, and that's a view, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen soon, even with the pandemic.
We have Leticia Souza raising her hand. Please, Leticia, can you make your question?
Hello, can you hear?
I can.
Hello, Professor. My name is Leticia. It's such an honor. I'm an international relations student at UNIFACS, University of Salvador. And I don't know if you are aware of this, but the most affected part of the population of COVID-19 are people living at the slums, the favelas, and they do not have access to a great sanitization or any structure for even a heavier health awareness campaign. And unfortunately, here at Salvador, we've been dealing with floods and the risk of landslides, and common living shelters are not a good option. With this mindset, so how can we take action to manage such a difficult task, even to the government, to provide a safe environment for public health at this dangerous situation?
Okay, I understand the question. I was recently in Cambridge, where my university is, and I noticed very few people were on the street except homeless people, and they weren't wearing masks. Now, there aren't a lot of homeless people in Cambridge, but there were definitely some there. So it's a small version of what you describe. To give advice, I'd need to know more about the situation, but I'd suggest the first thing to do would be to make masks available and strongly to encourage them to wear masks, maybe to give them a little money if they wear masks, or maybe to threaten to fine them a little bit if they don't wear masks. I think to accompany masks, this is just a thought off the top of the head, free masks and a little money every day that you wear a mask. Something like that. That helps. The evidence, as I understand it, is that masks are extremely effective. The second thing to do would be to think, is there any place where they can go? Is there any place that's now empty? Is there a hotel that's empty? Is there a university that's empty? Is there some place where it's reasonable to live, where they can be placed during the time of the pandemic? Now, it would be very important to make sure that they understand what's happening and they don't feel they're going to jail. But to work very aggressively and say, we're trying to save your life, that seems like a priority.
Yeah, Professor Sunstein, we had this here in Brazil, in which the government was transferring funds for people in need, but instead of making like the Treasury, U.S. Treasury there in the U.S., in which the U.S. Treasury made a deposit directly in people's banking accounts, the government was requiring here in Brazil people to be in a line outside the banks to have the money. So it's completely, it doesn't make any sense. So
yeah, that's definitely sludge. Waiting in
exactly.
line. Yeah.
Exactly. Waiting in line to have the money to be at home. So it doesn't make any sense. We have another question from Carolina that's written here. Professor, it's an honor for us to have you here. In one of our quotes, public health, and she quotes you, public health is the issue of human behavior which can be addressed by smart, evidence-based policies, end of quote. It's important to know how people behave and the best form the states can resolve based on the reality that people live in their nations, but also following the requirements given by HWO to all of them. With the different forms which behavioral science that's being applied in the United States and in the world, what this could bring to the post-COVID-19 world.
The post-COVID world. Okay, so when we're thinking about public health generally, one problem is that people don't know what they're supposed to do to avoid health risks. So it could be a pandemic, it could be something like normal flu, or it could be something like heart disease and cancer. And the fact is that very few people want to get the flu or heart disease or cancer, but they don't know what to do to diminish their risks. And there are two directions you can go that behavioral science suggests. One is to inform people so that their own ability to assess what they should do is increased. And the other is to create a social architecture so that if people just go about their lives normally, they will be healthier. And we can imagine many things that would help on that count. Could you excuse me for about 2 minutes? One of my dogs is complaining right now, and you might have a health issue. I'll be right back.
It happens to me too here.
And,
Snow is very quiet right now. Não é Snow, tá aqui quietinho. Your American counterpart is not quiet. Em seguida, nós temos a pergunta de Ronaldo Henrique.
Okay, I have returned. Thank you for your patience.
No problem. So I have a question from Ronaldo Henrique. Ronaldo?
Hello, good afternoon, and thanks for the opportunity. Here in Brazil, we also began the quarantine like uh, most by ourselves before the official institutionalization on federal level. But we have some kind of arm wrestling between the president and the state and city level governments here. And here, the thing is more about the trade-off between keeping the economy in its early recovery process because we are in a recession and now we are a tiny bit of recovery. And one of the promises Bolsonaro made on his presidential campaign was to restructure and recover our economy. And looking on long-term premises, how do you think would this kind of institutional struggle can affect us both on our democracy and economic stability? Because earlier, Bolsonaro also wanted to give more responsibilities to the states, and now he seems bothered a lot by the fact their way of dealing with the pandemic differs from his.
Okay. When I was in the US government, as now under President Trump, people think a lot about cost benefit analysis. And while the idea of cost benefit analysis doesn't make people stand up and cheer, it's a framework to think about these questions. So here's one way to think about it. We have various possible levels of aggressiveness to combat the pandemic. So let's say the least aggressive is keep doing what we did a year ago. And the most aggressive is all the businesses have to be closed and everybody has to stay home. Now it's clear that the most aggressive will dramatically reduce the public health problems. That will really help greatly. It's also clear that would be economically very devastating, and we might be talking depression, not recession. The first approach, everything as normal, would be economically advantageous, certainly in the short run, but in the short run as well, it would create a large number of illnesses and deaths. So both of those are unacceptable, probably. Under very extreme conditions, a complete lockdown probably makes sense, but they would have to be very extreme. And under current conditions, complete openness doesn't seem indicated in Brazil or the United States. So now we're making progress. We're thinking, well, what in between those two extremes would make sense? And to know, we need to know what do we get in terms of public health as we get more aggressive, and what do we lose in economic terms as we get more aggressive. And to rely on just intuition or ideology probably wouldn't be the best idea for anyone. To think about, what do the scientists say and what do the economists say? So I'll give you an example. In countries that I think are doing a pretty good job, they think there's a time to be very aggressive. And then as the incidence of illnesses and deaths decreases, we'll have phase one. And in phase one, we'll start to open up some. There will be some manufacturing. The rest can do some things. And then if things continue to get better after a certain period, we'll have phase two. And then we'll have phase three. And phase four will be, let's call it the new normal, which would be very much like things were, let's say, 4 months ago, except people will be maybe taking somewhat more precautions. So I think it's a way of, so what I'm suggesting is instead of saying, we need to protect public health, so let's shut down, or we need to prevent recession, so let's open up, we need to look at what are the intermediate possibilities and what do we do to lose for each. If this is helpful, my university is thinking exactly what to do next fall. We haven't decided, are we going to be open or not? And the questions we're going to be asking, I believe, are exactly these questions about what kind of solutions are there that are as open as possible, and what do you lose in terms of public health, and what do you gain in terms of other things that you care about. This is a way of saying that once we get concrete about what's gained and what's lost, the difference between someone who says let's open up soon and someone who let's stay closed, they start to narrow. Then people are talking to each other.
Thank you, Professor. I have one more question here from Amanda. Do you think that the pandemics in the United States is way worse than what is being notified, since there are people that don't want to be in debt because of healthcare bills? Is the government taking any actions to change the situation?
Okay, great question. I do think that the number of cases is higher than we have data to show, and there are many reasons. One is a lot of people don't have symptoms. I have a friend who had no symptoms, and she just got tested because she wanted to be, and she had it. So there are a lot of people who have symptoms. There are other people who have modest symptoms and who haven't been tested. And there are other people who have real symptoms, but who didn't get tested because, it's not necessarily because of money, but because of sludge and time. And if you find out you have it, they're going to tell you in most cases, stay home and sleep. But you already knew that. So definitely the numbers, and the economic reason is another. The numbers are higher, almost certainly, than we have. I do think we're having serious thinking about our healthcare system that is, let's say, energized by virtue of the pandemic and the challenges that people are facing every day.
Professor, two more questions to end our session here. Guilherme asked, Professor, first and foremost, we are all honored to be able to interact with you so closely. As you mentioned before, if people think that wearing masks will protect the health, they are more likely to do it. And if people think that they are putting others at risk, they are less likely to do whatever represents such a risk. These measures regarding communication seem, of course, to be especially effective in places where misinformation is not as rampant as, let's say, in Brazil. Are there any other strategies that would make sense in a context in which people refuse to acknowledge the danger they are in, as well as their peers?
What a great question. Okay, so thank you for that. In the White House, there's a word I'm going to tell you about. The word is validator. I'd never heard that word validator before. It sounds like a superhero. There's Spider-Man, and then there's the Hulk, and then there's the validator. But a validator is someone who is trusted and who works outside the institution that's doing the communicating, who says, wear your mask. So what we need, I think, all over the world are trustworthy validators or surprising validators who can communicate that to people. It's also a very good question whether certain kinds of misinformation should be controlled in one way or another. Now, in a system that's dedicated to freedom of speech, we want to be very careful with the government getting involved. But for newspapers and websites and Facebook and other private entities to be refusing to display or to elevate misinformation, that's probably not the worst idea.
You are running out of time, people. So the last question from Vicente. Vicente, please, can you make your question to Professor Sunstein?
Hello. Thank you for your time here. We are all honored to have such an important teacher here. And my question is about the importance of the collective behavior about biological enemy. Can that, which doesn't recognize borders, flags, constitution, and how can that make this role of the state bigger? How can the state will behavior from now on about that? You know, the pandemic. That's a curiosity I have.
Okay, that's also a wonderful question. So thank you. It's a very complicated matter. So during the Ebola crisis, there was keen interest in shutting borders all over the world. The problem was if you shut borders, people who had Ebola would eventually find their way somehow, and then people would die. So what was necessary was to solve the Ebola problem collectively as a world. And the world did very well at that. It didn't close the borders. People worked together. You could, and to some extent, it's a good idea to be very careful to allow people to come into your country, especially from areas that are badly infected. Quarantines when people enter is one approach. No one can come in from very badly infected countries is another approach. Testing on arrival is an additional approach. Because the world is so interconnected, it can't be that Brazil or France or the United States or Germany is going to be completely isolating itself from others. But we are, I think, in a time when recognizing that we're all members of the human race, we need to have borders that, while eventually open, will also have monitoring and tracing and testing. I believe it's the case if you enter New Zealand now, you either have to be quarantined for 14 days or you have to be tested, something like that. And that might be generally a direction countries will take.
Thank you, Professor Sunstein. Do you have any final thoughts, final recommendations for us here in Brazil, like how to tackle not only in terms of public policies in the federal level that we cannot control at this time, but for us as individuals, what can we do as individuals, as a political community, as a society, as individuals to do in this time of difficulties?
Okay, so thank you for that. And, it's a great honor to get to speak with you all. I think my advice is at one point in the next 24 hours, do something kind that either helps someone reduce the risk he or she faces or that makes that person's day significantly better. So to do something within 24 hours that makes someone's world safer or happier, the greatest beneficiary of that act will probably be you because you did it.
Thank you so much for your kind words, for your message, for your thoughts, for your message for us all. It's an honor to have you here, Professor. Once more, I would like to stress our gratitude to have this opportunity, and thanks so much. Have a great day, and have a good day for you people as well.
One final word, if I may. I do hope to visit you all, not tomorrow, but I will
Have
visit
you been to Salvador, Professor? You're here in Brazil?
I'm very excited about coming. And I'm
So,
going to use the word soon. I hope so. I'll be able to be there soon.
it's a great city. It's a very beautiful town with a lot of beaches, and we have a very feast mood here in Salvador. So you would love it. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks. And to you, all of you. Thank you.